Welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerd Steve.
And I'm Nerdarchy's Ted, and tonight we're digging into the bones of your world, its legends, its lies, and the truths that spark entire campaigns.
From whispered origin stories to apocalyptic prophecies, lore and myth aren't just backstory, they're power, the kind that moves empires, haunts ruins, and gives your players something to chase or fear.
Exactly. Whether you're building a pantheon, planting a world ending rumor, or just hiding secret history in an old tavern song, the right myth can turn a simple setting into something unforgettable.
Tonight we're cracking open three of our favorite worlds to show how myth shapes motive and how lore becomes a living force in your game.
First, in Ether skies, lost gods and forbidden scripture float just below the surface, fueling sky cults and shadow wars with truths too dangerous to speak aloud.
Then it's Under the Dome, where society built on curated truth is starting to crack, and the myths they buried may rise to reclaim the world.
And of course, Zoo Mafia. Yes, even a world of criminal critters, myth matters, especially when old legends start crawling out of the zoo's deepest pits.
After that, we'll hit a Q&A. So if you got your favorite homebrew legend, a mythological plot hook, or just a big lore question, drop it in the chat.
All right, let's kick it off with a myth or piece of lore from your world or favorite genre that totally changed the way your players saw things. Or hey, you know, let's say drop a snake.
It's a dragon.
Oh, that's supposed to be a dragon? Okay, drop a dragon if you've ever created a legend just to mess with your party.
His mastery of emojis is a little less than
Sorry, I don't. I'm more ancient. I don't do those things.
those things. Speaking of those things, let's jump into our first topic, our first setting. In other skies, civilization clings to the sky aboard floating cities powered by volatile ether, while horrors fester below. A cold war simmers above the clouds, but it is the myths, forgotten gods, cursed technology, and prophetic skyfall that truly shaped the world's fate. Hey, check out the description below where you can find links to our first ever Other Skies campaign, as well as our D&D game where we play Other Skies, The Sky Remembers, in the description.
Myths and ether skies are treated like viruses, dangerous ideas that can infect a mind, a ship, or a city. The return of the 13th city, Haven, has reignited cults, conspiracy, and skyborne doomsday prophecies. The Ethernati suppress certain truths as acts of national security. Meanwhile, the Knights of the Anti Ether spread word that the fall of the gods was no accident, it was a warning.
During the Morning Hawk and the Dark, the Morning Hawk and the, I can't talk tonight, guys. Forgive me. I should have went and grabbed that water after all, Ted. The Morning Hawk and the Dark Harlot, myths incarnate. One a herald of sky's bleeding light, the other a living fragment of Haven's curse. So the Morning Hawk is an experimental ether ship that is from our very first campaign together, and you guys came up with the name for it. Morning spelled not as in the thing that happens at dawn, but spelled in the way you mourn something,
As in sadness.
as in sadness. But yes, that ship has become a myth and a legend in other skies, even though it's a bit newer compared to the rest of the history of the setting and the campaign. Um, you know, Also because it's come up several times. There's been a second prototype that's been created around it, and so these ships look a bit different than what people are used to seeing, and so when they are spotted, it is going to start create these myths and legends. But also, these are things that were used and wielded by heroes and also villains later on, and has been incorporated even more so into the lore of the world. Because I believe even now in our current campaign, legends are being born, and the Morning Hawk, as well as the Dark Harlot, are going to have a part to play.
Now, this is one of those things that if you got a game or gaming group and you play with the same players and you're going to stay in the same setting, it can be a lot of fun to just kind of advance the time of the world a little bit forward. And the events of the campaign that you ran last or two times ago has now influenced what is going on. And to harken back to, oh, let's bring back these characters, or something that they did and have it be a part of the plot can be an awful lot of fun. It's even more devastating when it's something, like what Dave did with, the first Ether Skies game, where we ended, and spoiler alert if you are just hearing about this game and haven't gone and watched it. It did not have, shiny happy endings and everybody gets to, narrate their characters out of the story like we've done, in some games. This was one that, had a bit of a twist to it, and some of those characters have indeed, come back into subsequent stories to see what happens. My character and Robin's character came back as essentially villains in Dave's D&D in a Castle game, and there's now even like rumors of Robin's character resurfacing in some aspect into the game that he's currently running on Tuesdays. And like those things just become super awesome, not only for the players, and that's what you would normally get, but in this particular situation, any of the viewers at home that have watched, the old game and are watching the current game, that's like an awesome, spoiler and breadcrumb back to that original game. So I love that stuff.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter whether you're playing in one of our worlds or you're even familiar with our worlds. The principles and the underlying principles and points here are real simple. Like Ted said, if you're running multiple campaigns with the same players, being able to take some of that stuff from those previous games and make it your myths, your legends, your lore in the current game, and especially if you do it in a way where you're kind of like slow revealing it, letting it being discovered through play, and not just dumping it on your players, but like, look, here's all this cool stuff I came up with from what you guys did last, but let it actually unfurl and unravel slowly, and more importantly, like make it feel like they're the ones finding the information and bringing it to light. It's going to be so much more impactful, and they're going to, I think they're going to really enjoy it a lot. I think my players have been really enjoying those aspects that are coming out from the previous games, that even if their characters don't know, it's like these little Easter eggs that the players are finding, and it kind of like helps suck them deeper into the world and the lore of the things that you've created, and it gives them ownership.
It doesn't have to be, the major game ending type situation. It could be something small. Here's a prime example of something that I've yet to do, but I definitely have the inklings of where I'm going to put it in. In Dave's Griffin Gaff game, I played a cleric, and at one point in time, we basically touched on a thread of my character learning deep speech, and there was very much the possibility of my character taking levels in warlock and some stuff going on, but like I wound up like fighting against that kind of stuff, and it never wound up going to any kind of like end game situation. But what did happen is I created extra copies of my ritual book, because it was like at the time only like 5,000 gold to make a book that had every single ritual spell available at the time. I'm like, I'm just gonna make, two full copies just in case something happens to this one, that I've got a backup. And you're like, okay, go ahead and make, this save, which should have been no problem for my character, but I failed. So Dave was like, okay, and he made a mental note. So there's two copies of books that are laden with all of this potent amount of magic, that are woven in with some eldritch entities magic and possibly sentience that now just exist within this world. So I was
and
like, well,
and
I
also,
wonder what. Go ahead.
just real quick, like that theme actually fits really good with the Other Skies campaign setting, even though that was Ulfgania. And it's not just that your character learned deep speech. Your character learned, it's a thing in Kobold Press, dark speech. And dark speech is actually almost like a form of spell casting. It's your words have power, and as the name implies, it's dark and it's evil. And and that's what the saving throw was for you, whether or not you laced it into that other book or not subconsciously,
So
which
I
and
just
I
thought like,
know, but Relian did not know.
yeah, the character itself has no clue what he did. He just assumed I did it all correctly, but subconsciously there's layers of extra magic that's imbued in the book and this connection to this, dark entity that anybody that starts playing around with those spells and those books is gonna have to deal with whatever those consequences might be. And like that's an idea of just looking at something that could be small that a player character does that you're like, okay, this affected the world um in a greater effect than the character and maybe even the player thought. I should revisit this at a later time. Now, in this particular instance, Dave and I both ran games out of Wolfgania at the same time. I'm still running a game under, with my kids, in the same setting, same continent. So it's very easy for, over these 50 to 100 years, whatever it's been since Relion's retired, for this book to have somehow moved of its own accord to where it might be found by others, whether it's with a villain or whether it's, in, a dragon's horde. You can definitely find a way to, okay, this wants to be discovered so that this entity can get back out there. But taking that to your game, something small, something that could easily be more important than their understanding, have that revisited in a later game. It can be so much more meaningful, so much more fun for everyone involved.
All right, Ted, where are we going next?
All right, so the ground was claimed. The surface wasn't abandoned, it was claimed by something else, and those who escaped were banished, not spared.
So in Other Skies, the premise is, you live in one of the 12, now 13 flying cities, right? The people fled the surface a long time ago, and there's all kinds of myths and legends around why they left, but nothing is really concrete. No one knows for sure. And and some people say it's all a conspiracy, and actually the surface is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. The others, in the games we played were saying, you know what? Actually, the governments know, but they're keeping it a secret. So like, there's all of these conjecture around these myths and legends. Um, and I personally I kind of like the idea of not always answering the question and solving the problem. We had talked about this in one of our other video and many of our other videos as well, but like these open-ended questions, you can do that with your myths and your legends, and it also gives you room to kind of let them breathe and decide which direction you want to go in based on the players you're playing with. As a matter of fact, if you're playing in your same world and you're running multiple campaigns, whether they're one after another or at the same time, there's no reason why the answers have to be the same for all of them. You can change it up. You can have a variant, variants, whether it's because you want to call them, alternate dimensions or versions of your world, or or maybe there's some other reason why it isn't the same for everyone. And also, just because you learn something doesn't mean what you've learned is true.
Yeah, so that's an aspect of looking at, and when you've got a situation where it's possible to have multiple viewpoints that could be conflicting, that's where myths and legends get to really be fun. And what you can really do is you put out, here's the list of opinions. Find out where the players fall, where the characters fall, because they might not necessarily agree, and whatever seems to be the most enjoyable could wind up being the answer. What is the most surprising could wind up being the answer. This is the great part where RPGs and history have this nice divergence, because history is set, but when you're running RPG games, nothing is set until it's found and finite, until it's like, okay, we need a definitive answer now, so this is what it is. Even when you think you have an answer, it could be a ruse, it could be a misdirection. So you've got the ability to kind of bend and flow as in more and more information is uncovered. Look at mystery shows; they're always finding new clues that change the course of the investigation. And who was the original suspect isn't, and it's now this person. Oh, but this other clue puts it back to the first person, so you can have a lot of fun with those kind of perspectives when dealing with these fun myths. So I look at all of this stuff as not only as a way to help shape your world, but to allow the opinions of the players and the characters to help shape the past.
Yeah, so one of the cool things that Keith Baker did when he created the Eberron setting, like they had this key focal point that the setting sets up the setting in a sense that you have the hunt, the last war, and the thing that ends the last war is this horrific catastrophe that happens to one of the kingdoms, um, called the Day of Mourning, creating the Mournlands. And one of the awesome things Keith does is Pete never says what happens, right? It's always a mystery because he left it so when you play your Eberron campaign, maybe that's something your players discover and find out what happened. But the only way to really find out what happened is for to play and for the DM of that particular campaign to figure out what it was and decide. So we are talking about these different topics through the lens of our particular settings that we're running and our games that we're running, because we will probably at some point turn them into our own campaign settings. And I think there's some lessons to be taken from that. Sure, we want to spell out as much as possible, but figuring out those key points where you don't answer the question and leave it up to the individual dungeon master to do it. Maybe we have some suggestions, but there's no cold hard this is what happened, because we want you to be able to explore it with your players and kind of like discover it together. They can't just read ahead and find the answer. City seals and forgotten pact. Legends tell of a bargain made of the 12 cities to lock away something beneath the clouds. Haven's fall and return broke the seal. The old pact demands payment in. Da,
So,
da,
so when
da.
we start looking at, this particular situation, this is the link to the eldritch entities that exist out in the in the distant edges of this particular world. They're the looming threat, like the Tarask. It's out there. It's not necessarily going to show up in the grandest way in every single campaign. It's meant to, help guide what the setting is. So when you're looking at your campaign world, what is a grandiose threat that shapes what the world is. With us, eldritch entities can seep into thought, into prophecy, into cults and organizations from both sides. Um, but it stems down to that this is out there without necessarily needing to be in every single game. So if you have an idea of your campaign setting and what fills that niche, it's going to allow you to kind of help build your own myths, your own legends for this world, so that you know how to make your world, shine and stand out from all the other generic fantasy worlds that are out
Yeah, and this was fun because in that first campaign we ran, the players got to piece some of this together, right, and figure it out. And the culmination of that game, where Ted had mentioned, like, it did not have a super happy ending, but they solved the problem, right? And the problem was the deteriorating seals, and they figured out how to reinforce the seals and kind of put them back for a time. It wasn't really a permanent solution, but at the time it was the best that they had, and it kind of worked for a while. So, they got to learn more about the world in that process. They got to learn, what the purpose for the flying cities were, aside from just refugees for civilization. There was more to it than that. They were actually configured into a magical seal that was broken when the 13th city fell from the sky. And the kind of the symbol of that, of the truly bad things happening, is when the city returns and has been corrupted, right? So, which is kind of like the catalyst for that whole campaign, our own kind of day of mourning, if you would. But you know the takeaway is to kind of have these things in your world so that the players can discover them, and you can go through them together. And I also like the idea of creating almost like incomplete sentences or thoughts when it comes to this kind of stuff, like, so that you have an idea and a direction that you want to go, but also leave it open. Give yourself some wiggle room, that if things in your campaign change, that you're not locked into it, so that you can change. Like, and I know there's some like schools of thought that absolutely hate this, like, to the point where they almost consider it cheating, right? They want everything locked in. It's got to be written out. It's immutable. It can't change. I feel it. Me, Ted, the guys we game with, and folks we game with, gals we game with, have more of a it doesn't happen until it happens approach. So we tend to be a little bit more loosey goosey and leave things open, because sometimes like more fun and better ideas spring from that.
there. I've had a number of my games change, you know, fairly hard directional shift because of something a player says, and I'm like, sure, I'm confident in my DM skills. I'm more confident when I get behind that GM screen probably than any other time in my life. And yet I game with so many veterans, so many awesome people and players that there are times that somebody says something, I'm like, man, that is fucking fantastic. And I might not say it out loud, but all of a sudden, no taking is happening, and all of a sudden, there's now a shift, there's now a change, and sometimes it could be, well, this is more evil. The players, are into something that is going to be a little bit darker than what I originally had planned. Sometimes it's just a better idea, and like Dave says, there's some people out there who absolutely won't do that. And you know what? That's fine too. I'm not trying to say that, you know, just locking in your ideas is the only way to do it, or that's the wrong way to do it. No, that's fine if that's your preferred running style. But being mutable is equally good as a concept, and for us, is better.
That just works at our table.
So your city's myth keepers just declared a legend officially false, but then your crew finds proof it's real. What do you do? Do you bury the truth, weaponize it, or let it burn the world clean?
All right, let's move on to Under the Dome. The world The world shattered when chaos magic surged across the land, twisting life, breaking laws of nature, and ending civilization as it once was known. In the aftermath, the last refuges rose, the dome, sealed cities forged from crystal steel and desperation. Each dome filters out the worst of the wilds. Monsters warp the chaos storms, mutation winds, but the protection comes with isolation and control. Inside the dome, survival isn't just about food and safety. It's about power, secrets, and who gets to write the story of what happens before. You can find links to weekly articles on nerdarchy.com in the description below. Nerdarchist Ted is always there, hard at work.
Right now, I'm expanding upon the area around Crystalia. Last week and this week, I dropped a little mini adventure. Something that's supposed to be like 2 to 3 sessions worth of material. So you can go and check that out. Lore and myth aren't just flavor in dome cities, they're foundations. Entire cultures have grown up believing the Baron's version of history, the priesthood stories of salvation, or the gladiators' worshipped prophecies. But dig a little deeper and you'll find cracks, both literal and metaphorical. The truth may be ancient, dangerous, or even alive. In the domes, myths don't stay buried, they claw their way back.
Founding lies. Every dome has a different creation myth. Who built them? Why are some cities bigger, cleaner, or more mutated than others? What's being kept out or in?
So this is the fun part of this particular world, is the fact that we want each dome to be different. The rulership is different. The people are different. The domes themselves could be, vastly different from each other. Crystalia is built with a lattice work of pink, translucent crystals, whereas Baleria is more like a spider web of Balerium, this like really dark metal that absorbs the magic of the chaos storms rather than just kind of deflect or reflect it. So the fact that these domes are all different speak to how the peoples that live there are going to absorb the truth, or in this case, lies that are being spread by its rulers. You know, in Titanholm, the city that's vast and run by giants and truly a titan that's a king, their civilization is built on might makes right. Giants are the superior city, superior species, and if you don't have giant blood in you, you might as well just be non-existent because they could care less about you there. um whereas in Crystalia, it's run, by noble houses, the grind barons, that are looking to set up, their version of history and how things should be.
Yeah, in Crystalia, pretty much you're going to be taught growing up there that it's always been the Grind Barons. They're the ones that erected the barriers in Crystalia in order to keep out all the monsters and chaos magic, and that's just the way it's always been. But that doesn't actually mean that is the truth. That is just the lore that has been spread to the populace. At this point, I guess it would be more like propaganda than lore. There's nothing saying that they actually created the barrier that protects their citizens. They could have found it, they could have conquered it, they could have stole it. There's so many more options, but that's not the lore that they're going to teach. Just like in the other domes in other cities, they're going to all have their own myths and legends around how the dome sprung into existence, and depending on the leaders of that particular dome will definitely reflect on what that looks like, what is being taught. It's another way that they use to control the populations, because they want them to believe that they're the only ones that could possibly make sure these barriers stay erected to protect them from the harshness of the environment that is the world of Volcania after this apocalyptic event that kind of destroyed most of the world and most of the things that lived in it, or at least changed them pretty much.
So extrapolating it to your world is, every area that has been settled, you know, was it a conquering? Was it a finding, a founding? Um, you know, who lived there before? If you talk to, a vast array of people across the U.S., the founding, myth and legends of the USA are vastly different, depending upon the nationality of who you speak to. It's a vast story. So when you look at a fantasy world that could have these same extrapolations, you could have displaced, citizens. You could have, conquered peoples, and their versions of the story are going to be different as to, what transpired versus the people who now live there, the conquerors. So it could be definitely a lot of fun to play with those kinds of things, to build on your established history, and to, possibly right the wrongs of the so-called founders of your city. Especially if one of the players is playing a character that's of one of these displaced species. That could be a pretty cool redemption arc for that kind of character.
Yeah, it's kind of a great place to introduce alternate and conflicting histories too, right? And then let the players kind of suss out for themselves what they think is the actual truth.
So the dome's purpose, are the dome's shields, prisons, research experiments, or something else entirely? We've kind of hinted at, this concept, which is, kind of loosely going forward until we come up with something else of, like, perhaps, these are either ancient magics, dropped by the gods on their way out the door, or are manifestations of the sleeping gods themselves, which is why the domes are all, different and operate, differently. Um, but, they are, in fact, probably all of the above. They're shields for those citizens living inside, but the leaders want to keep them inside, because by being inside, sure, I need to make sure that I get, food and shelter for you, but at the same time, you operate off of currency. We generate things that eventually money is trickling back to the government. They have power, they have wealth, and they want to keep that, that there. And with wealth and power, has the ability to, okay, well, especially in Valeria, the city that I've got, which is a majocracy, absolutely research experiments are going on. So the citizens living within, being trapped within the domes, is funding, these research experiments to, see what kind of new magics and things might be possible.
And that's on the microcosm level, right? Think about
Mhm.
like the people don't really know how the domes were created or by whom. They just know what they've been told. What if the domes themselves are experiments, right? They're basically biodomes that someone else is observing. We've talked about the way that Ulthgania became the setting it is today, this post-apocalyptic D&D world, is because the gods kept meddling and creating things and deciding, nah, I don't like this, we messed it up, and they would sweep it aside into a pocket dimension until they did this so many times they just weakened the barrier between worlds, particularly the realm of chaos, and that chaos magic just kept seeping in the form of storms, and that's what actually causes the major catastrophe that essentially destroys the world as it was known before. Well, what if the gods didn't stop meddling? What if they didn't stop, creating things? They just decided to put in some fail safes. Like, what if we put them in these little domes? So when it goes wrong, or if it does go wrong, it's not nearly as much. It's less to clean up. What if they're still doing what they've always done? But the people just don't know that they are the research experiment. The
You can have
gods.
a lot of fun. You can have a lot of fun with that concept, especially with the gods, like stepping back to, like, observe how are they going to handle, this vast change, because the gods aren't as present as they once were, within the earlier days of Ulthgania, within the Griffin Gaff style of games. So it could be more than just research experiments. It could be a lot going on, multiple layers like that onion.
But Ted, what about cultural echoes? Gladiator schools, scavenger cults, machine worshipping sects all have origin stories and none of them match.
This is the great part to build the world and make up a whole bunch of things that may or may not be true. Um, you know, in order for an organization to have power, they need to have confidence and they need to have a story. And when your leader steps up and says, "This is the way it is," that message needs to sell. And doesn't matter what the truth is. There are plenty of organizations and people in power across this globe in the real world that spew forth messages that are categorically wrong, and yet they they broach a following. They pull people in. People line up just to throw money at these charismatic leaders. And whether you're talking about a gladiator school, a scavenger cult, or any number of things, you throw these kind of organizations, these kind of individuals into your world to divide, to bring people together, to have this note of power. And every single cult and organization is going to have one of these figures, and voila, now you have elements, these NPCs that are designed for conflict, for discovery, for elements that are going to breed the adventurers necessary to help uncover the truth and bring down the corrupt.
Well, also too, when you introduce these different cultures and they each have their own myths and legends and lore to them, right? In the same world, and like they're probably going to have their own, for instance, origin myth, right? Look at our own different religions, mythologies. They all have them. They all have their origin story, and they all conflict with each other, right? They don't all quite line up. And there's no reason why you wouldn't do that in your own world, to let your players kind of sort through them and try and figure out what their truth is, right? It may not even matter which one is true or not. It may matter more which is true to your characters, to your players' characters, right? How, because that's going to be part of how they experience the world and how they interact with the world, is through these truths. And they could be different for each of the players in your game, right? And the fun part about that is it can create these fun tensions and rivalries within the group that don't necessarily have to bleed over into anything too cantankerous, but just enough for them to have philosophies and different philosophies that they can debate with each other, and it makes for some cool role playing opportunities, in my opinion.
And the one of the things that Dave and I love doing as DMs is you put out plot hooks, and whatever things the players, the characters latch onto, that's where the story goes. So you can put out these myths, these legends, whether it be something in session 0 or whether it be something that gets kind of, you know, trickled throughout the game. Uh, you know, when they find something that's interesting and latch onto it, great. If not, just set it aside, possibly use it later. And when you link it to these different organizations, it makes it easy to be like, okay, well, they've latched onto this one, which this thread kind of spider webs out of, okay, well, where does that plot thread take the adventure? um so just having those kind of seeds to drop, it adds more to the world and adds more to the player biting onto a thread that you put out there. Therefore, they've shown interest. This is the area I should explore. This is the area I should be able to prep my material in for when they're ready to go down this direction.
Definitely.
So if your character lived under one of the domes, what truths would they refuse to believe, even if it turned out to be real?
Perception is reality, and reality is perception. with that, we're going to go into our third segment. Let's talk about Zoo Mafia with myth, legends, and lore. In Zoo Mafia, the 1920s Prohibition era zoo hides a secret. The animals run an underground crime world after hours. By day, they're regular exhibits, but once the humans leave, the zoo comes alive with mob bosses, shady deals, speakeasies, and turf wars. Three powerful families, Carlo Hambino, Machine Gun Otto, and Al Capone, vie for dominance while the lower level mobs try to get made. You can find the quick start rules as well as the upcoming Kickstarter down in the description below.
Lore and myth in Zoo Mafia live in the shadows, urban legends whispered between cages. Some say the original zoo boss still runs things from a secret enclosure. Others believe a human once discovered the truth and was dealt with. The myths help build the secretive, dangerous world these animals operate in, fueling paranoia, betrayal, and ambition. Even in this gritty noir setting, legends matter. They shape ambition, justify violence, and offer clues to lost caches, long forgotten escape tunnels, or ghost gangs from zoos past.
The founding zoo boss, a capybara crime lord who had disappeared mysteriously but is rumored to still pull strings behind the scenes. Right? So creating like these mystery figures that may or may not have existed, almost like a boogeyman for your world, is a great idea. Even though like this is not a fantasy world, this is not science fiction, this is crime noir, but with with animals, and you're on the side of the devils instead of the angels. But this can still play out. Like, who was the first crime lord in your zoo, right? Maybe it's none of the three. And, maybe each of the families have a different story, how they came to be, and perhaps they're all the hero. Each of them are the hero of their own story, and they're the ones that got rid of this mysterious figure to set up their crime family, right? And it's just a story that gets retold and retold, and then even like the citizens, they may have a different version of it depending on it, and this could even be a source of bad blood between some of these crime families.
Well, I mean, you can take the concept of myth and legends even to the point of whoever your current established bosses are. Um, and while the core concept that we've run is, one of the three has to fall, I like the idea of, you know, painting each of the established bosses with this, legendary paintbrush. These are figures that are at the start of the game basically untouchable. It's supposed to be a daunting task to bring down one of the three. Should be holy crap. This is what you're really expecting of me from the character's perspective. From the player's perspective, sure, we understand this is the buy-in. This is what's supposed to be there. But from the character's perspective, this is oh crap. This is major. You don't make these kind of plays until you've established, some kind of power base of your own that you basically are trying to get to this legendary status yourself. Um, so whether you're talking about, some possible legend that has come before, or the legends you're dealing with now, the buy-in on a game like Zoo Mafia has to be there. There has to be this fear of who are these people that are in the zoo, people uh that you're dealing with. And if you don't have that sense of fear when confronting them, you're not quite hitting the noir beat, that crime beat as hard as you really should. Um, because I think that's the layer that you're looking for. You're looking for this, it's not we're heroes and we're going to change the world. This is gritty, this is real, this is life and death, type of things. And a wrong move against the wrong person, you're going to wind up, with your buddy's head, on the pillow next to you when you wake up.
Just the head, nothing else, is what I think you're implying. Yeah.
Yes,
So
yes.
the idea is, right. you can have these mythic and legendary figures, and they don't always have to be the crime boss, right? It could be a hitman that retired from a career you don't get to retire from, right? And they're whispered about and only in dark alleys and hushed tones, or a information broker that knows everything, and it's said that even the three big bosses fear them because they have so much information and so much dirt, and if anything were to ever happen to them, it might all just get released. So there are definitely different ways of going about it.
So, if we're going to get into some more myth and legends, what about the Crimson Collar? Cursed mob heirloom said to bring power at the cost of loyalty.
So the idea of introducing into a game like Zoo Mafia artifacts, right, that have power, but they only have power because people have given them power. In a sense, like the cursed heirloom, right? The idea that it is a symbol of power, but also it's associated with this negative connotation as well, because the superstition around it is, yes, you're going to get more, whoever has it is going to be more powerful, but you're not going to be able to trust the people around you. But and to a certain extent, like that just might be the cost of power anyway, without this symbol. And you can introduce interesting and cool things like that into your game. A legendary gun that never misses, a braid, a knife or blade that just won't break, and the blade, it never dulls. Like, it may not really be those things, but that doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is it's a symbol of those things and people believe it to be true. So
So, so Zoo Mafia is built on the foundation of Power by the Apocalypse, which is very much a different style game than D&D, but you can still craft items, magic items, if you want to use that particular term, but they're not going to function the same way that you're used to, D&D kind of things. These could come with, moves or abilities that are like class powers or the like, playbook powers, moves, um, that they wouldn't necessarily be able to do, whether it be a gun that never misses, a gun that does more damage. There are elements that could be done that you know fill this aspect, but when you start putting in myth and legend into these kinds of things, perhaps every time it's used, it's altering the world in some way, shape, or form. It's a narrative element as opposed to a mechanical element, but you can have a lot of fun with things like that.
yeah, like I like the idea of introducing items like that give a mechanical bonus, but only when people who are using them and having them used against know what the item is. Like, if you didn't know what the Crimson Collar was, it has no effect because it doesn't actually have any real power. The power is coming from the belief of everyone around it. And not in like a fantasy magical way, just in a way that, like, oh, if you think that's a gun that never misses, then subconsciously you do things that kind of lend to that myth, that legend, or an item that is perceived to have power. Well, social interactions involving that item with people that are aware of it tend to go in the favor of the person using it, just because that's what everyone believes. It's not an actual power of the item per se. It's more of a power of it's more of the power of belief from the people around it. Like, if
Power of
everyone
belief or
goes,
power of perception.
yeah, like if everyone goes to church and you believe you're blessed because you're at church, well, maybe you are blessed. But if you didn't know what a church was or that you should be blessed, how would you be blessed? Like, so it gets into this like philosophical kind of quandary of, you know, it does the MacGuffin do the thing, like a placebo effect, right? Basically, you can benefit from the placebo effect because you believe it to be true. Also, Outback Alice's files. The Koala reporter has dirt on everyone. Some say she holds the zoo's true origin in her photo archives. So I like the idea, right? Like our lore master, our our curator of myths and legends still exists, but it takes a more modern spin. In this case, it's a journalist, it's a reporter. You know, they have all the facts, they have all the knowledge, they're putting out the information. But again, also, they're trying to tell stories, so they could be spinning it as well, you know, to be more salacious, more interesting, more exciting.
Yeah, I love the character that you created for Outback Alice, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, this one. Having an NPC that is linked to multiple uh plot threads, multiple myths and legends, allows you to kind of help guide the story, and at the same time be someone that's maybe not necessarily the quest giver, but the person that players keep coming back to. Um, in my first Griffin Gaff game, Anna Lassalar, the elven wizard, wound up being a character that wound up being used often throughout multiple games as a contact point because he had a lot of information. He was never the one to, oh, let's go out and adventure. Let's go slay the monster. But being in charge of a library wound up having him tied to a lot of different threads of information, and therefore the players kept coming back. So if you have a game in Zoo Mafia where you're looking to, possibly get some dirt on this person or that person, Outback Alice, if you were to befriend someone like her, you might be like, all right, look, I'll trade information for information. I can sell dirt if I get dirt, kind of setup. And that's not, something that's been overly used despite a number of campaigns run within Zoo Mafia. Sure, we've gone and we've had her make numerous appearances, but never to that same extent. Uh, but to have that as a possibility is always a lot of fun and an avenue of consideration for future games.
Yeah, and you can replace Outback Alice with a storyteller, librarian, a curator of a museum. Like there's a lot of other places you can go, and again, like you said, one, it's a place to get information. It's a place for your players to interactively have these myths, legends, and lore of your world given to them, whether you're playing Zoo Mafia or Dungeons and Dragons or some other role playing game. It's always great to have these kind of characters around so that it doesn't feel like you're ever really lore dumping on the characters. They're going and they're interacting and they have questions. And a lot of times it can be from their prompting. Maybe the initial meeting happens because of something you set up as the GM, dungeon master, or zookeeper in the case of Zoo Mafia. But, you know, if you set it up and it's memorable for them and they keep going back, then then it's all prompted by the players and they have the buy-in, and it's never going to be a case of you lore dumping on them, but a case of them kind of pulling out the threads of your world as you go.
Yeah, they're seeking out the links that you've put out there. They've attached themselves to a character that they have found compelling, and that's the takeaway. Put in somebody that the players want to talk to, whether they've got a bizarre affectation, whether they're reluctantly helpful, whatever it is that is that draw, finding that so that the players have somebody that you know they want to keep coming back to. That just makes it a lot more interesting. And then of course as a DM, you'd be like, all right, well, now that you've gotten used to coming after this guy, maybe I can do something. Maybe I can threaten them, whatever.
Turn them into the villain, whatever, small things.
Or turn them into the villain. All right, an old mob myth turns out to be real. Maybe it's a legendary escape tunnel. a hidden weapon stash, or the ghost of a zoo boss who won't stay buried? What myth would shake up your mob if it came true?
All right, folks, this is the section where we take your questions and answer them. Feel free to throw them out there. We'll give you a couple minutes. We don't get questions, then we call it a night. We both work in warehouses and 10-hour shifts, and they're long days, and it's getting hot out. So, but McCheesy Poof, be cool if an item always crits on a hit, but the DM keeps track of the hit crits until the end of the game. Then near the end of the game, the item bursts into enemies equal to the number of crits made. What do you think, Ted?
Oh my God. Keeping track of the number of crits and then having to dump that many enemies on that particular player.
Well, there's more
And
to
if
it
we
than that because it always crits every time it hits.
right, right. So if you every attack roll crits, that weapon is going to be absolutely devastating on the battlefield. I I think like I wouldn't do it that way. I would put in um you know an objective. Like I would make this be like some kind of artifact. The player finds it later in the game, and I would need buy-in from the player of like some kind of unknown consequence is going to happen by using this, and the player and the character have to acknowledge that through the attunement process. And I did a blog post a while ago, based off of the D&D movie Honor Among Thieves, where like Simon had to basically challenge the helm to get attunement. So I would go through some kind of role playing aspect like that, and there would be some horrific element that happens either to the character wielding the weapon or someone that they care about. Some ill fate is going to happen after it's completed whatever its objective is. And as long as the player and character were buying into that, that's the direction I'd go, rather than giving myself homework while we're playing the game. I already do enough as a GM trying to track that stuff. That is not that is not the direction I want to go.
Yeah, well, I like the idea of like the weapon, like something like along the lines. This, as long as you wield, whatever Excalibur, your aim will always be true. It will never stray from the path. Uh, until it's your undoing, right? And like that's the idea that like with every hit, every hit that it strikes true is one more step towards your undoing at the end. um and like kind of bake it in, and like you said, like you like the consequences known but maybe not exactly known.
Right.
Just the more success you have with it, the more epic your downfall is going to be, and there might
Yeah.
be stories to that end.
And I've had both my own player characters and other characters that have been mine as I DM'd for, that have said, hey, I want to have an epic death. I want to go out in glory. um so like that's fitting for that kind of character or that kind of character story, even if it's a player goal, not a character goal. Nobody is like out there seeking death except for that one Warhammer dwarf. uh
Gortrak.
there you go. I knew you'd remember the name.
Kenneth Woody, have you guys tried running a Pathfinder 2E campaign yet? I've been running the system with my main group since the release, and it's probably our favorite system at the moment. I've played in a few sessions, but other than that, I've not really delved much into Pathfinder 2E or
I
Pathfinder for
uh
that
I
matter.
played a little bit of Pathfinder 1E. I made a character for Pathfinder 2E. I was not impressed with the rule set. It's still built on the bones of 3.5, and I think fifth edition is superior, in my opinion. You know, whatever game you most enjoy, by all means. Um, but it's just not for me.
On that note, And that's a wrap for tonight's deep dive into legends, lies, and half truths that shape our worlds. Thanks for joining the myth making.
From skyborn prophecies to forbidden dome scrolls to the whispered tales of a raccoon crime boss, tonight proved the lore isn't flavor, it's fuel.
Massive thanks to everyone who hung out live, shared ideas, or dropped their own campaign myths in the chat. You're all the reason the stories keep growing.
If you had fun, hit that like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss when we drop another tale from the edge of imagination.
And until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.
And